Welcome to episode 102 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to be doing a coaching call with a teacher named Jim and exploring how to get student buy-in for your class cell phone policy. Visit truthforteachers.com to get links to recommended resources and to share your thoughts on the show. So the episode that you're about to hear is a free coaching call that I conducted with a graduate of the Hour Teacher Workweek Club. His name is Jim, and he's entering his 4th year of teaching, so he's still pretty new to the profession. Jim works on a grades 7 to 12 campus, and he's a high school geometry and 7th grade honors math teacher. The questions that Jim submitted to me for this coaching call were mostly about getting student buy-in with room arrangements and routines, procedures, class rules, that sort of thing. But the part of the call that I wanted to share with you here on the podcast is where we do a deep dive into getting student buy-in with a cell phone policy. In some of the coaching call excerpts that I share here on the podcast, I'm talking a lot, and in others, I'm mostly just asking questions. It sort of depends on which part of the call I decide to air. And in the case here in this call, I'm asking a lot of questions. I want you to listen closely and see if you can pick up on some of the key concepts that Jim is stating as we talk. Like most teachers, Jim already has most of the solutions inside of him, and it's just a matter of helping him uncover the different parts of those solutions and put them all together in a way that's actionable. So notice how each of his responses to my questions are like a clue. Each response that he gives leads us to the next piece of the puzzle until we have the whole thing assembled. It's a really fun process to participate in, and I think it will be fun for you to listen in on too. What we're doing here in this conversation is partially about ironing out the details of the cell phone policy and partially about figuring out which areas of the classroom to give kids ownership of and where we need to provide more leadership and modeling. As a newer teacher, Jim is still figuring out his teaching style. He's still figuring out what's going to work with his student population. The call is also about uncovering the deeper issue, which goes beyond cell phones. And that is teaching kids the important life skill of deep work and concentration. And understanding that as adults, they will need to unplug at times so that they can focus on completing a task without distraction. That is a learned skill that we have to teach and model and practice. So the approach that Jim and I settle on is what makes sense for his teaching style and his subject area and the type of class culture that he is trying to create. What we uncover is the right solution for Jim and his students right now. But there is no one right approach. And in fact, if you ask yourself some of the questions that I asked Jim, you might find that your answers are completely different. And that's okay. The value really is in asking the right questions. Because with honest self-reflection, that's what's going to get you to the right result for your classroom. So let's jump into the call right at the place where Jim is talking about why he wants to be a bit more flexible and a little bit less rigid in his classroom procedures.
It's like a gut feeling that says, if I can get their buy-in and their input and involve that in my routine, my year will go better. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that, I think, in my core. But the question is, okay, especially with cell phone use, food, students talking, like how do I ask for that? How do I communicate that? Is it a group conversation? Is it a written response where they journal or write something and I read it later? And is it something that happens over the course of the year? Is it a one-day activity? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So I usually tell teachers to listen to their gut when their gut is telling them to do something that feels uncomfortable. Because if your gut or in your heart or, however you want to think about it, if deep inside you feel like you should do something, but you're just a little apprehensive about it or you're not sure how it's going to work, that's usually a signal that you're on the right track. Because growth only comes when we're out of our comfort zone. So in this case, if your gut is telling you that things will go better if you're more flexible, if you involve students more in the process of setting up routines, tell me what you're feeling in your gut. What specifically do you feel like you want to do in this area, even if it's uncomfortable or you're not sure how to do it?
Yeah, well, I think I want the students to sense that they have a responsibility and opportunity to set the tone of the classroom and to set the routines of the classroom, and that is something that they can grow into and learn and develop their own. It's kind of this idea of taking responsibility for their life, and it starts in a small way with the classroom. So rather than it being, okay, here's how it's going to be, and I'm the one setting the tone, and you just got to follow what I say, which I think can have a place, but at the same time, I think there's a really, really important transition, especially for high school students, to say, hey, wait a minute, now you're responsible enough. You can brainstorm and think through and problem solve this, and really you have an opportunity to set a classroom atmosphere. So,
can you think of something specific that you can do to sort of give them that ownership piece where you're allowing them to take some of that responsibility and learning that they, are sort of, they have influence on how their future goes. They have influence on how the environment runs. Is there something specific and actionable you can think of there?
I mean, kind of what comes to mind and what I've heard, I guess in my own mind, what I think about when I think about doing this is, first day, you get posters out and the kid, and you say, well, how do you want cell phone routines to go? And then you have them do that. And part of me, when I heard that idea, I was like, that's great, and that might work. But I think for me, I would want to start with laying out the vision for what I want the year to look like. And then as I get to know my students, maybe give them small pieces of, and I'm kind of just brainstorming as I talk right now, but you could start with, like, I don't know, food or cell phone use in the classroom and say, well, what policy should we have here? And then, we try that for a couple of weeks and then come back to it. And so I could start small rather than trying to do the whole classroom routine all at once at the beginning of the year initially, and maybe have them do the poster thing, or I could have them write down their ideas and read them later in my head.
Yeah, let's dive into the cell phone policy, because I think that's a good one to start with. I like the idea of giving them more ownership there, because that's something that's very personal to students, very important to kids, and it's a big piece of their autonomy, is feeling like they are connected to the outside world. Because school is really the only time where we're asking them to pretend like they aren't, right? To put it all away and to not be plugged in. So let's think specifically about that policy. So your idea is, on the first day of school, how will you approach that?
I think that I could outline the philosophy I mentioned earlier, and I want to kind of work with them in developing a policy that leads to learning. And the idea is that kids inherently want to learn, they want to grow, and kind of that mindset. And then say, okay, well, brainstorm with each other. What would a cell phone policy look like that would lead to learning, that would really facilitate that? And as they discuss that, or even have some individual think time first, to compare, share, and then I could get feedback and we could discuss it. And part of me is a little apprehensive to set a policy just then. I kind of like to take things home and think about it. But perhaps what I could do is I could have a policy in my own mind of what I think would be ideal, and then I could facilitate a discussion. I think the question is, well, where does that go? Maybe we develop a policy, maybe it works or it doesn't work, and so then a couple of weeks later we can come back to it and say, how's this working, guys? Is this really what you want?
I think the piece here that you already have a sort of a policy in mind is important, because if we're asking kids for input, we want to make sure we're actually taking their input. And if they feel like a lot of times we as a teacher, we already know what we want, and so it's just sort of perfunctory to give kids sort of the illusion of ownership, but ultimately we're still going to do what we want to do. So I think let's see if we can figure out a way to approach this in a way where they truly do have some ownership. So one way could be to just level with them and say, I've done some thinking about a cell phone policy, and this is my vision for it. I want you all to be, this type of learner. I want you to have experienced this type of freedom in the classroom, but I also want us to be focused on learning. So, I have these 3 guidelines and this is the reason why, let's discuss them. Or start with a completely blank slate and say, actually, I don't have a policy written out. This is something I want to create completely with you guys. Tell me what your thoughts are. What things do you think should be included in there? And sort of develop it together as a whole class lesson. I'm guessing that by the time they get to your class, they've already had cell phone policies in other classes, so they probably have a good idea of what kinds of things to contribute here. So I'm wondering, do you think that it would be better for you to just come to them and say, this is what I have in mind? Is it better for you to sketch that out ahead of time? Are there specific things that you want to make sure they hit upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is good for me to have in my own mind what I want, but I sense that I kind of, what I want to do is I want to come up to them and say, okay, the goal of this should be so that we have a learning atmosphere that is conducive to you guys. And the thing about it is because of you guys, and I want your input. I want to start with a blank slate and say, what policy do you think is best? And I'm apprehensive though, because I've kind of done that before, and I don't know. Like, question is, do they know? Can they do that? Can they really do that? Or is it more of I want to come to them with a blank slate, and maybe my mindset shift would be, well, maybe they don't get it right at first, and maybe that's okay.
I think whether or not they get it right depends on whether or not there is a right that we're trying to get them to. So if it's a thing where you're completely open to their idea, then it's something you could develop together. But tell me what your vision is. How do you want students using, specifically, when can they use phones in your classroom? When can they not?
Yeah, I think, if I had it, ideally, I would have phones away, turned off for most of the class. I don't think they contribute much to learning. The issue is that's not really the world that they live in, and I don't know how realistic that is, nor do I know how many adults actually do that when they work anyway. And so our question is, okay, well then how do I facilitate that? And I think ideally it would be that they would learn that cell phones can at times take over. Sometimes you're using your cell phone not because it's a useful tool, but because you're just trying to get through the day or escape from what you're currently doing. And that's a lot of what it can be. And I've experienced that in my own life too. I'm like, why am I on Facebook so much?
Yeah.
And so maybe just somehow communicating, because that is at our school, we communicate that to them so much, like cell phones are bad, like, and it's like, okay, they get that so much, but then how do I really help them to see that and learn that, wait a minute here, deep mathematical reasoning is sometimes slow and methodical, and that it really is important to be focused on the problem, to think it through slowly and carefully, and that cell phones can sometimes can be a distraction to that. But if I just tell that to them versus them realizing that, it's two different things.
Okay, so what you're wanting then is you're wanting students to arrive independently at this conclusion that there needs to be boundaries with phones, and that phones can be a distraction from learning. So that's different from saying, I'm truly giving you input on the cell phone policy, because if they don't arrive at that conclusion, then that's going to be at odds with what you want and with what your teaching style is. And ultimately, it's your classroom and you make the final decisions. So if we're going to give kids choice, let's give them choice on something that they can really actually have some choice in. If in your classroom, phones need to be away the majority of the time, that's not an unreasonable expectation. And if that's what you think is best for students, then I think the better approach here is to figure out, okay, how can we have this conversation so that they understand that piece? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So it's not input on how the classroom is going to operate or what our policy is going to be. It's going to be just sort of understanding why. What is the reason
Oh,
for it?
okay. Rather than, so one approach is, here's how it is. Another approach is, here's how it is, and here's why.
Right.
Okay, I see.
Exactly. So we can think about a way
Okay.
now to help them arrive at the why. And the student ownership, giving them choice. There's all kinds of other routines you can give them choice about. Maybe something with like, bathroom routines, like, how many times they're allowed to go to the bathroom during the quarter, or drinks, or, movement around the classroom. There's all sorts of places maybe where it's a little less important to you and they
I
actually
see.
can have more ownership. But cell phones are maybe an issue where, this has a potential to be extremely distracting and you feel strongly about it. And you just want to sort of get
Yeah.
kids on board with that. So let's see if we can think of how to get them to see that, to see the importance of it. Is there some sort of lesson or activity that you can do with them to help them think about intentionality with cell phones?
Huh. Good question. Let's see here. We could have them like build something or do some project with their cell phones out and Facebook open. And one group has the cell phones out and Facebook open, the other group does not, and see and compare it. Or, yeah. Because I think like in my own life, like some of it for me has been, I am, really annoyed at how much I'm on Facebook, and I've noticed it, take away from my own personal productivity and stuff. So I get annoyed at it, so I want it away. Has been my own experience. And like, I don't know, like, are they able to have that at 15, 16? Are they developmentally aware of that? Some of them might be, some of them might not. It's kind of my sense.
I wonder if sharing that and maybe a specific example from your own life would be helpful there,
Yeah.
because I don't think that a lot of adults are having that conversation with kids, because I don't think a lot of adults are aware of how much social media infringes on our ability to be present in the moment. I think that's just sort of a societal problem in general. If we are bored for even 3 seconds while in an elevator or at a stoplight, we pick up our phones. We want that constant stimulation. So I don't know that, especially if you said that your school culture is just sort of phones are bad, put it away. I don't know that kids have really ever heard adults reflect on that. And I wonder if it might be sort of nice to open up and talk about, maybe there was a time when you were at an amusement park with your family or something and you were really looking forward to it and you wanted to be present, but you found yourself constantly checking text messages or getting into like an argument on Twitter or Facebook with someone, when you were supposed to be enjoying something, like some sort of way. Talk about how it sort of pulled you out of the moment. And then invite kids to sort of think about that same thing. I don't know your kids well enough to know if that's something that could be held in a class discussion or pairs, or maybe they just want to write about it and keep it privately, but sort of get them to think, has there been a time in your life when you didn't really enjoy something because you were tied into your phone? And then from there, maybe move into a place where it's like, was there a time when you didn't get to like learn something fully, something that you were really interested in, and you didn't really get to the full experience of mastering that because you were distracted? Because that's ultimately the piece that I think you want them to understand, is that you are never going to be an awesome mathematician if the whole time that I'm teaching you're texting and you're on Snapchat. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure they've had experiences like that, if you can invite them to sort of reflect on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how even like starting with my own story, my own experience, and opening up could kind of help maybe help them think of examples in their own life where that might have happened.
Exactly. And it will show that you have a reason. It's not just because you don't want to deal with cell phones or you're anti-technology. Let them know, I love social media. I'm on social media all the time, more than I even want to be. And this is something that I'm struggling with too. And so I'm also going to put my phone away because I could be checking my phone when you guys are working, and I'm going to choose not to do that out of respect for the work that we have to do here. I take your learning seriously. I know that you want to take your learning seriously. You've got plans for your future, and this is a course that you need in order to graduate. So let's make an agreement together. We're going to put away our phones and we're going to concentrate on math while we're here. And that doesn't mean that we're going to be totally disconnected from the outside world, because there is a time and place for technology. And I'm guessing that you use devices in class maybe, but just not their cell phones. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I do occasionally. Well, we're in the process of getting better hardware.
It's hard when you don't have the equipment.
We have laptops that sometimes take 5 minutes to log in and then don't work. But we do occasionally use them, and we have a computer lab I'll go to, and there is a time and a place for cell phone use. and I'll communicate to kids that, if you have to look up something, you have a cell phone there, and it has a lot of information. If you can learn how to search the web efficiently and effectively and find the information quickly, that's really useful. But that's something that I want to teach and guide, not have that open-ended. Here, whatever you want, get your cell phone out and search, because I think it's a skill that really should be taught and structured to facilitate kind of thinking I'm looking for in them. So.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that can be an important thing to let them know too, that, we will be using technology in here. We don't have a ton of equipment. It's not, the tech setup isn't exactly what I want, but we are going to be trying to, bring in the outside world, do some real world research, look for real world examples, and connect online. But we're going to be doing that in a way that's structured and together and really focused on your learning, because that's our goal here, is to focus on your learning.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling about that whole process? Are there any like sort of nagging questions where you're like, I'm not quite sure if I figured out how I'm going to do this part?
When I have tried to have discussions around it, I found this little voice in the back of my head that said, this won't work. The kids won't be able to do this. And like right now I'm in this like really good place where like, yeah, let's do it, And I, for example, like classroom jobs, like I implemented that last year. It was amazingly helpful. It lasted the whole year. The kids enjoyed it. And the first day I gave it to them, and like, they're not going to sign up. Like, no way. And pretty much everyone does. And all the jobs are overflowing. I don't have enough jobs, and
that's awesome.
And I'm like, whoa, what? Okay. So yeah, I think that experience happened a lot last year for me. When I was in the club. And I kind of sense it might be similar in this situation where I get in the classroom and I'm in front of my students and I'm doing it. And I might have that little voice in the back of my head saying, it won't work. The kids won't, they'll goof off. They won't be mature enough. But really in my heart of hearts, it's not what I believe. And that's not what I think, it's not what I want for them. And there is this kind of growth for me in terms of being, appropriately vulnerable with them in terms of open about my own experiences and communicating that care. And I think that's from the conversation we just had is one of the keys in this process. Versus, okay, let's do a cell phone policy open-ended. It's no, here's my vision. Here's what I think is really conducive to facilitating the kind of thinking I'm looking from you guys. And here's been my own experience in my own life. And that's very different things. Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about a consequence of students, if your expectation is that phones are out or put away unless you specifically say it's okay? What will be the consequence for students who break that?
Let's see here. In the past, I'll ask them or remind them at first or give them the stare, and then I might take it away. And that's what I've done in the past. And that's worked okay. But kind of what I'm more looking for is, okay, there's a time and a place to teach and instruct and guide into why I'm doing it. And there is a time and a place to just say, well, here's how it is, put it away. I mean, I could it just depends on the kid so much, I find. They all have different needs. Some of the kids just need kind of someone that cares enough to really say, no, don't do that. Some of the kids need a little bit softer touch and just kind of, or they just forget. They literally just forget and they can't think of, and because it's a habit for them. And so their cell phone's out because it's a habit and it's not like they're intentionally doing it. And I can usually discern, not always, but usually discern the difference if I'm present in the classroom that day.
Yes, and I think that's a really important distinction, that when kids are getting out their phone, it is not a personal attack on you. It's not necessarily saying that you're boring or they don't care about learning or they don't want to be successful, which is how I think it's sort of easy to interpret it as a teacher. You sort of take it personally, like, I put all this effort in this lesson and now you're ignoring me and you're on your phone, and you just, it makes you feel bad as a person. And I think sort of communicating that to kids, like, guys, like, be present here with me. I'm here present with you. I've put away my phone. I've put away everything else I'm thinking about to really focus on learning. Let's do that here together. And this idea that you're not taking it personally and you're not, responding to it necessarily as a behavior problem. I don't know that it necessarily needs like a punishment, because as you said, for a lot of kids, it's just habit. They don't even realize that they're reaching for the phone a lot of time.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's an addiction. You just don't feel right unless you have your phone in your hand or nearby. So,
Yeah.
realizing this is not really, it's not meant to be a disrespect. It's not necessarily a behavior problem. It's just sort of a habit that kids have, or a natural tendency, and taking an individual approach to it, I think is really good. I think it's good to have something in writing, like some sort of agreement that you've come to with students and parents, where they know that if this continues to be a problem, you reserve the right to confiscate the phone, or, dock their grade, whatever it is that your school sort of decides is the policy. But for
Yeah.
most kids, it does not need to go that far. I really like what you're saying about taking an individual approach. Is this a student that I need to come alongside of and sort of reason with? Is this a student who just needs a gentle reminder? Is it a student who
Yeah.
maybe needs me to make a joke about it, and will respond to humor and put it away? Every kid is going to be different. And I think the less that you act like this is a huge, big deal and a huge infringement on, your rules, and the more that you just sort of come alongside the kids, like, yeah, I know, I keep wanting to check my phone too, but thanks so much for remembering what we agreed on together and our vision for learning here together. Thanks for putting that away. I appreciate that so much. I know it's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that to me,
Yeah.
just, from what I know from talking to you, that sounds like that sort of comes naturally to your teaching style. Because I think we do have to think about our own personalities here. And,
Yeah.
what I'm describing to you is what I would do as a teacher, but it sounds like also that's your style, that you like to be real and authentic with kids and connect with them on a personal level. And, judging by your success with the class job system, I think that sort of speaks to how much they respect you. They want to contribute. They see your classroom as a community where everyone is pulling their weight. I mean, you express that's something that's very important to you. And the fact that they want to help out in the classroom really sort of speaks volumes about the type of relationships that you're building. So I think for you to continue that approach with the cell phone policy sounds to me like it would be very natural and would be a really good fit with the other things you're doing in your classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, that does ring true to me. Yeah.
That's important.
Cool.
It needs to ring true to you. If it doesn't, then there's something wrong. Then we would need to keep revising and keep thinking through, because I don't feel like you should do anything in your classroom, when it comes to issues like this, that doesn't ring true to you. There's always a way that you can adapt it to make sense for what you believe, what the kind of classroom culture you want to create, and what kind of kids you have in your classroom. So I'm really excited to hear that you feel like you have a good approach for this, because I know it can be a huge issue in classrooms.
Oh, yeah.
And I think
Oh, yeah.
capitalizing sounds like a manipulative word, maybe sort of building on or extending from those relationships you have with kids. I think using that as the foundation and your authenticity as a teacher, I think it sounds like a great approach. And I'm really excited to hear how it goes for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. This is good.
I hope that listening in on this portion of the coaching call that I did with Jim was really helpful to you in figuring out where you can give kids more ownership and where they need you to lead the way. Maybe you thought through these questions yourself and you came to the opposite conclusion as Jim. Maybe in your classroom, it makes more sense for students to have their phones out the majority of the time and to use their phones for research and to work on them regularly during class. And you want students to brainstorm the guidelines for doing so. In fact, I've asked similar questions in another circumstance, and the conversation with that teacher went in a completely different direction. So this call is not meant to be prescriptive for every person listening. It's simply meant to help you think through some of these different issues so that you can ultimately make the best decision as the lead learner in your classroom. Your takeaway truth for the week ahead is this: a leader is someone who demonstrates what's possible. As you look for ways to truly be a leader to students in your classroom, remember that your job is to expose kids to possibilities, to demonstrate what's possible. Think about what skills students really need in order to be successful in your classroom and successful in life, and model for them how to practice those skills. Stay connected to your vision for your classroom and what kind of learning experience you want students to have. Communicate that vision clearly to kids. Demonstrate for them what is possible so that they can create their own vision. Remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it. Truth for Teachers is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more great podcast recommendations, go to edupodcastnetwork.com. That's edupodcastnetwork.com.